Do you require any assistance, ma'am? The voice was calm and steady as the final rays of the Georgia sun filtered through the pine trees, casting long golden shadows over the narrow road. Claire Whitman glanced up from her Fanino signal and noticed a man slowly stepping out from the edge of the forest. He appeared tall, with dark features, likely in his mid-30s, calm eyes, and holding a flashlight in one hand. He kept his distance, hands slightly raised in a respectful, yet assured manner. His worn denim jacket, plain gray shirt underneath, and clay-stained work boots spoke of a life far from the city. I'm fine, Claire replied, somewhat too quickly. The blazer she wore was damp with perspiration, and her pencil skirt clung tightly to her legs in the growing humidity. Crossing her arms, she added sharply, Really, I have it under control. The man's gaze shifted briefly to the hood of her BMW, which still emitted soft hissing sounds from the earlier steam. Then his eyes returned to her, neutral and patient, not judgmental or sharp. Are you certain? He inquired, a faint smile pulling at the corners of his mouth. Because it's getting colder by the minute. And in a skirt like that, you might start regretting this roadside view rather soon. Claire stiffened, unaccustomed to such blunt honesty. He spoke without ill intent or flirtation, merely as someone who had witnessed many pushing through poor decisions with excessive pride. I said I'm fine, she repeated with firmer resolve. All right, he responded, nodding slightly, then without waiting for approval, she cautiously moved closer to the car, not heading to the driver's side, but stopping by the hood and crouching near the front grille. I just thought I'd take a quick look. No worries. I am not going to charge you. I never asked you to touch it, she said sharply, feeling her heartbeat quicken. He nodded silently and opened the hood with the ease of someone who has done this many times before. If this thing is about to burst coolant or fail completely, you should know before trying to start it again. Claire opened her mouth but stayed silent. She didn't stop him. There was something about the calm assurance in his actions that held her in place. No fuss, no show, just pure concentration. He leaned in, holding a flashlight steady in one hand, while the other hand gently brushed over a cluster of wires near the radiator, his forehead creasing. Looks like your upper hose is cracked. You're leaking slowly but consistently. If you attempt to drive it, it will overheat within a few miles. Claire took a cautious step forward, her arms still crossed. And you are what, a mechanic? No, he replied, standing upright and wiping his hands with a rag from his back pocket. Just someone who enjoys machines and knows how to listen when they begin to complain. She said nothing, and he turned slightly, nodding toward the trees behind him. I live just down that way, about half a mile. If you want to wait there until help arrives or just to warm up, I have coffee, blankets, and a porch that is peaceful. Claire hesitated, then said firmly, I'll stay here, but thanks. He nodded once again. He took a step back and began heading toward the trail without insisting any further. All right, the porch light will be on in case you reconsider, he said, then vanished into the woods. About 10 minutes later, the storm hit her like an abrupt, cold shock. Rain pounded the car roof with fierce intensity. The temperature fell exactly as he had predicted. Claire sat behind the wheel, trembling. She kicked off her shoes and draped her blazer over her legs, but it offered no relief. The man had been right. Through the foggy windshield, she observed the trailhead and caught sight of the faint glow of a warm porch light flickering through the trees. Muttering words she dared not repeat, she grabbed her bag and dashed out. The house was simple and nestled among the trees, almost as if it had sprouted there naturally. Michael stood beneath the porch roof, not at all surprised by her arrival. I changed my mind, Claire said, pushing back her soaked hair. He merely nodded and opened the door. Come on inside. The warmth embraced her immediately. Cedar paneling, a gentle fire flickering, the kettle whistling in the kitchen. Dogs approached softly, wagging tails without a sound. No barking or chaos, just quiet companionship. She said nothing for several moments, simply absorbing the surroundings. Pristine wooden floors, artwork decorating the walls, the calm atmosphere. You rescue dogs? She asked at last. Some, Michael replied, handing her a towel and a cup of tea. Others just arrive on their own. She sat down carefully on the couch, feeling the comfort settle around her. Allowing one of the dogs to rest its head gently on her foot, she asked, And the paintings? Her gaze fixed on the watercolor near the fireplace. I create what I cannot express, he replied. Claire Whitman took a sip of the tea, saying, let it warm her from within. For the first time in a very long period, she was not in control. Yet oddly, it did not feel like vulnerability. Instead, it felt like calm and protection. And strangely, that frightened her more than the storm outside. Perhaps it is the simplest things: a warm cup of tea, a glance without judgment, a small home nestled in the woods, that reach the deepest part of the heart. If you have ever experienced a moment when surrendering strength brought you real peace, press like to support this story and tell us where you are listening from. Because maybe, just maybe, someone nearby also needs a place called safety. Claire Whitman did not sleep deeply that night. After the tea, Michael guided her to a small guest room just off the corridor. The bed was humble, the mattress firm, and the sheets clean with a faint lavender aroma. A small lamp on the bedside table emitted a soft amber light that spread gently over the wooden walls. One of the dogs, the smallest among the group, a curly-haired mutt with one ear flopping sideways, settled near the door like a quiet guardian. She lay awake for hours, half attuned to the crackling firewood in the other room and the occasional whisper of wind pressing against the window panes. Her thoughts wandered in the dim glow of the night. Her body remained motionless, while her thoughts raced rapidly. It was not only the storm that unsettled her, nor the fact that she was resting inside an unfamiliar helmet. What bothered her most was how swiftly the stranger ceased feeling like one. Michael had not pushed. He had not cried. He had not sought to charm her or demand anything. He had not even flinched when she almost snapped at him by the roadside, and that alone disturbed her far more than any act of flirtation might have. He was steady, grounded, genuine, and she was not ready to trust that yet. At dawn, Claire Whitman awoke to the scent of freshly brewed coffee and warm biscuits. The dogs had disappeared from the hallway, and outside the modest window, a soft light seeped through the tall pines. Her garments from the previous day were dry and folded carefully on a wooden chair tucked in the corner. She cleaned up in the small, immaculate bathroom down the corridor. Everything inside the home felt humble, yet deliberate. No mess and no facade, just a lived-in attention to detail. When she entered the main room, Michael was cooking at the stove, flipping something in a heavy cast-iron pan. The fireplace still glowed faintly, and one of the dogs she now knew as Rusty approached her with a gentle wag of his tail. "Morning," Michael said without turning around. "Hope you slept well," Claire replied with a courteous smile. "Better than I thought. The coffee's fresh, and there's cream in the fridge if you want some." She poured a cup for herself, leaned on the counter, and watched him move effortlessly like a quiet rhythm in the morning. Someone who had prepared this meal countless times before, neither hurried nor careless, simply fully engaged as always when cooking. "You only ask when I have visitors," he remarked, glancing at her with a slight smile. Claire chuckled softly. While sipping her coffee, she mused, "You probably do not get many CEOs stuck in your driveway." "No," he smiled back, "you're the first." He then placed the plate before her, scrambled eggs, biscuits, and something that appeared suspiciously like sausage gravy. She paused. "You did not have to go all out." He shrugged. "This is just breakfast." They ate mostly in silence, the comforting kind that did not make anything feel absent, but rather that nothing extra was necessary. Midway through the meal, Claire put down her fork. "You knew who I was yesterday," he nodded, "but you did not say anything." "Did not see the point." "That was unusual," she said as she searched his expression. "Most people either want a photo or a job offer." Michael looked at her gently. "I assumed you had enough of people expecting things from you." She blinked, caught off guard by the response, not expecting it to hit so deeply. "I am sorry I snapped at you," she said after a pause. "Back on the road, I was not exactly gracious." Michael shrugged with one shoulder. "You did not owe me grace. Not that kind of night." Claire took another sip of coffee and then glanced around. "This place is beautiful, quiet, not much, but it is mine." He responded, "Found it after I left. The city needed room to reflect." "Why did you leave?" He hesitated, then glanced down at his plate. "The world became too noisy. I earned some money doing what I enjoyed, but then people cared more about the signature than the work. I disliked who I was turning into," Michael explained. Claire Whitman tilted forward a bit. "You were doing well?" He nodded slowly. as an illustrator for children's books, some gallery pieces, and I even completed a mural project in Washington before everything fell apart. Now I just live out here with dogs, he locked eyes with her. Now I live out here with peace. Claire felt unsure if she envied or pitied him. After breakfast, Michael walked her to the road. The storm had cleared, but the air was sharp, moist, filled with the scent of pine and wet soil. Her car remained where she left it, now softly shining in the morning sun. He inspected under the hood one more time, then handed her a piece of tape with a caution. This will hold for about 20 miles, just enough to reach Marietta. There is a reliable mechanic off Highway 278. Tell him Michael sent you. He won't charge you too much. Claire nodded, grateful. Michael stepped back, hands in pockets. Safe travels, Claire. She opened the car door but hesitated, something within her resisting the goodbye. She glanced back at him, noticing the quiet calm in his expression, the relaxed posture, the way he stood like someone with nowhere else to go and nothing to prove. Do you, she faltered, then steadied herself. Do you ever sell your paintings anywhere? He raised a brow. Not under my real name. Well, if you ever do, I want to, she said as she pulled a card from her bag and extended it. I know some people. He accepted it but did not glance at it. Claire stepped inside and closed the door behind her. She started the engine and listened as it struggled to come alive. Rolling down the window, she looked up at him and said, I truly meant what I said. The paintings are breathtaking. Michael smiled slowly with sincerity and said, Thank you, Mom. She smiled back and replied, Don't call me ma'am. It makes me feel like I am in church. He laughed softly as she pulled onto the road. Watching her drive away, Claire glanced in the rearview mirror just once and noticed him standing at the forest's edge. The wind gently lifted his jacket, and one of the dogs was by his side. She could not explain why, but that image lingered in her mind, long after the road curved and the trees opened up to the vast highway. Back in Atlanta, reality hit her like a harsh blow. Her phone flashed with missed calls and frantic messages. Her assistant was babbling about rescheduling a board meeting and client demands. Her inbox was overflowing. Her sleek apartment looked exactly as she had left it, bright, cold, and empty. Yet something inside her felt unsettled. She changed into more comfortable clothes and opened her laptop. She typed in, Compassion Souls, the signature she had noticed in the corner of one of Michael's paintings, and discovered a whole online discussion about a mysterious artist whose work portrayed animals with deeply emotional, almost human qualities. There was no name, no photo, just pure speculation. Suddenly, Claire Whitman, who had never been, during moments when distractions took over, she found herself browsing through every artwork, each piece holding something she couldn't quite understand. Sorrow, endurance, calmness, a glimmer of hope. On that night, surrounded by the silent atmosphere of her penthouse and the city lights twinkling beyond the glass, she recalled Michael's words, I paint what I can't express. Claire grasped that feeling more deeply than she wished to admit. Even though she wouldn't see him for several days, her fingers still hovered over the card he had never glanced at, silently hoping he would discover a reason to reach out. 3 days slipped by without any word from Michael Benton. No calls, no emails, no appearances. Claire reminded herself it was expected since he was not the type to reconnect quickly. No man who vanished into the woods with a house full of rescue dogs and artwork, signed with a fake name, would eagerly seize networking opportunities. Yet, she kept checking her inbox, scrutinizing missed call notifications, despite knowing well they held no sign of him. This was not impatience, but a deep-rooted curiosity that had settled in an inconvenient part of her mind. On a Monday afternoon, she sat in her office at Whitmore Biotech, half paying attention as her vice president of operations went on about inventory setbacks. Beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Atlanta skyline loomed like a glass wall. Claire nodded appropriately, interjected brief remarks, and ended the meeting early. Once the door closed behind her, she turned toward the window, arms folded, mentally far away from the biotech laboratory floors below. The night spent at Michael's shop lingered in Claire's mind in unusual ways. It wasn't only his silence or the dogs, or even the painting on the wall. It was the feeling of calm she experienced in his company. No demands, no pretending, no harsh judgments. Just quiet acceptance. That kind of silence never simply passes through a person. It remains, especially for someone like her who had spent the past 10 years making noise loud enough to drown out her own uncertainties. Claire stood across the room and opened the drawer of her credenza. Inside, beneath a folder filled with regulatory drafts, was the card she had given Michael. She picked it up, turned it over in her hands, then slipped it into the pocket of her jacket. The garage off Highway 278 was exactly where Michael had said it would be. It was a squat building made of cinder blocks with 2 open bays, a row of rusty cars, and a hand-painted sign stating, "Bose Repair Honest since '89. Claire parked in the dusty lot and got out of her rented replacement vehicle, a sleek but ordinary black crossover. The sun shone brightly, and the lot lay silent. A tall man in coveralls, stained with grease, appeared from one of the bays, wiping his hands on a rag. "You, Bo?" Claire asked. The man nodded slightly. "That depends on who is asking. Michael Benton sent me," she replied. Bo's expression instantly shifted to one less guarded and more intrigued. "Well now, haven't heard that name in a long time. How's the stubborn guy?" Claire smiled despite herself. "Still fixing things before being asked," Bo laughed. "That sounds about right. What brings you here?" she wanted to know. "Leave something for him," she said, pulling a small envelope from her purse. Inside was a handwritten note and a single photograph she had taken with her phone, showing his painting of the blue-eyed hound above the fireplace. No captions, just a brief line of thanks. Bo took the envelope and said, "I will make sure he gets it." As she turned to leave, Bo added, "You are not the first person to come searching for him, you know." Claire replied, "No, he used to be part of a larger life. Lectures, shows, contracts. But then something happened. He refuses to say what, not even to me. Yet he walked away from everything. People keep trying to pull him back." Claire glanced down at her shoes and Bo smiled gently. "He only returns for what feels genuine." Back in the city, the days stacked up like papers in a file. Claire immersed herself in work, clinical trials, investor meetings, employee onboarding. But every time she stepped into a quiet elevator or drove home alone, the question crept back. Why had he never reached out? Then, on a Thursday morning, her assistant knocked softly on the office door. "There is someone here to see you, no appointment. His name is Michael Benton." Claire's heart did not simply skip, but seemed to stop. "Send him in," she said quickly. The door opened, and there he was. He had not changed. Same calm presence, same steady gaze. But he looked out of place in the polished glass and chrome environment of her 10th floor office. No jacket, just standing there, standing. Wearing a dark button-up shirt and jeans, his hands were clean, yet a faint hint of oil lingered on his fingertips, as if the forest had not quite released him. "I hope this is not a bad time," he said quietly. "Not at all," Claire Whitman answered, standing to welcome him. "I'm really glad you came." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him, and glanced around the room as if trying to understand how she belonged in this space. She motioned toward the chairs opposite her desk, but he hesitated before sitting down. "You left something at Bo's," he mentioned. "I wanted to thank you for that night." There was a pause filled with quiet, then he finally took a seat. "That painting you photographed? It is one of the few I have never shared with anyone." "I can see why," she said. "It stayed with me." "I noticed your alias," she added kindly. "I recognized more than a few of the pieces." He gave a small smile. "I always thought keeping my identity secret was safer," Claire said, "but hiding doesn't guard us forever. It merely postpones the moment the right people find us." He looked into her eyes, and something passed between them. Not flirtation, nor duty, but a deep sense of understanding. "I came here to return the favor," Michael said finally. "I know what it feels like to be surrounded by noise, and yet remain alone. I thought maybe you could use a reminder that silence still exists." Claire exhaled. "You have no idea." They spoke for nearly an hour, about everything and nothing, about work, dogs, painting, silence, and loss, Michael shared. She shared a story about one of the dogs, Max, a lab mix he had discovered abandoned during a flood. Claire told him about the very first clinical trial she had ever led, and how a young patient, after recovering, had once given her a crayon drawing. It was crumpled, funny, and priceless, and she still kept it in her wallet. Finally, Michael stood up and said he should get going, mentioning he just wanted to check how she was doing. Claire accompanied him to the door and asked if he would ever think about displaying his work under his own name. He looked at her quietly for a long moment and said, Maybe if the place was right. She smiled and said she knew just the place since they were opening a wellness wing at their new campus, filled with art, light, sound, and real things. Perhaps he could help make it feel less like a laboratory and more like tranquility. He neither agreed nor refused as he reached the elevator. Claire gently called out, "Michael." He turned around and she said, "You were right about the car," her voice softening, "but more than that, you were right about me. I had been running for so long I forgot what stillness felt like. You didn't just fix the radiator, you fixed something I never realized was broken." He nodded slowly and replied, "It takes one to recognize one." The doors closed, leaving Claire standing in a different kind of silence, one she no longer feared. The following week passed in its usual dizzy sequence of strategy meetings, investor briefings, and supply chain troubles. Yet Claire felt changed as she moved through it. Not because something around her had shifted, but because something inside her had. Her life had gained something new, yet because a needless element had been removed, it was hardly noticeable. She still arrived early, stayed late, and responded to emails with exacting efficiency, but her thoughts wandered to places they never had before. She noticed herself spending more time in the company's meditation room, speaking softer during meetings, smiling more often at the interns. In the quiet moments between tasks, her mind drifted toward Michael. On Friday morning, she made a choice. Gathering the executive team in the conference room on the ninth floor, she presented a proposal to change the design of the new Whitman Wellness Wing. The initial concept included abstract installations from international artists, costly and detached. Claire stood at the head of the table, her voice calm and assured. "I want to commission artwork from local creators," she declared. "Art that centers on emotional healing, not just aesthetics." Her chief brand officer showed some resistance, asking if she meant therapeutic art. Claire nodded firmly. "Art that feels like home, like breath, like stillness." There was silence around the table, but no one dared oppose her, especially with her unwavering gaze. As the meeting concluded, she sent a brief message to Michael. "I wasn't joking. I want your work in the new space, just a few pieces to begin." He did not reply right away, and she did not expect him to. That evening, instead of meeting potential clients for dinner, she drove with no GPS, no assistant, no driver, just following her instinct. The city slowly gave way to endless roads bordered by whispering pine trees, and by the time the stars twinkled above, Claire spotted the gentle glow of a lantern swinging on Michael's porch. She paused at the gate, and one of the dogs she could not quite remember the name of, perhaps Duke, approached and let out a single low, welcoming bark. The door creaked open, and Michael stepped outside, wiping his hands on a rag stained with paint. His expression did not register surprise, only a warm familiarity. "Thought I saw headlights?" I wasn't planning to come," Claire admitted as she pushed the gate open. He held the door wide for her. "Are you hungry?" She hesitated. "Actually, I just wanted to see something." Michael raised an eyebrow but said nothing, leading her inside. The house smelled of citrus and fresh oil paint. A fire burned low in the fireplace, and all the dogs lay asleep, scattered in different corners. Claire stood quietly in the center of the living room, her eyes drawn to a covered canvas resting against the far wall. "What's that?" she asked softly. "It's something I started the morning after you left," Michael replied. Claire stepped closer. "May I see?" He gave a small nod. She lifted the covering, revealing a painting of a woman. Not an exact likeness, but close enough to make her breath catch. The figure stood alone on a deserted stretch of highway, her hair tousled by the wind with a storm gathering behind her. Yet her face showed no fear, only a calm sort of surrender, a quiet relief. Claire stared silently. "You painted this," she whispered. Before she could say more, Michael moved beside her, his voice low. "It didn't matter if you ever came back." Silence lingered as she turned toward him, her tone gentle. "I want this one placed in the wellness wing, although it is not yet complete," he replied. Claire nodded thoughtfully. "Neither am I." That evening, they did not share a bed, as stories might imply. Instead, they sat side by side on the couch, with their feet resting on the coffee table, watching the fire slowly diminish. He spoke of a mural in Washington, D.C. that had been painted over by an unrefined developer. She shared memories of her mother, a nurse who passed away before witnessing Claire's graduation from MIT. He remained silent, reaching out softly to touch her hand without a word. The following morning, Claire left before dawn, making no promises nor feeling pressured, but she left her scarf draped over the back of the chair. 7 days later, Michael arrived at the New Wings construction site with 4 paintings. He came driving an old pickup truck without help or fuss. The site manager called Claire, who promptly came down to meet him in the sunlight, filtering through the bare beams of what would later be called the reflection room. The paintings were carefully placed against the wall, each wrapped in canvas. "Are you certain?" Claire asked as she removed the covering from one artwork, a watercolor showing a hound resting under a willow tree, his face filled with tender sadness. "Yes," Michael said, watching her closely. "I believe this is the proper place." The workers stepped back as the two of them stood quietly before the art. Then a man in his 50s from Electranza, with silver hair in his beard, walked slowly over, saying, "My wife would have adored this," his voice filled with warmth. The story she shared last year mentioned that dogs seem to comprehend grief far better than humans do. Claire Whitman remained silent, simply nodding once, as Michael glanced away, his eyes darkening. That evening they had dinner in the city, not at a restaurant, but at Claire's place. She cooked, only to burn the rice and leave the fish undercooked, while the smoke alarm blared. Michael chuckled and placed the pan under cold water, saying, "This is exactly why I prefer living in the woods." Eventually, they settled for sandwiches on her balcony, surrounded by the shimmering city skyline. Claire observed him keenly, the way he absorbed everything around him, with a quiet calculation and a stillness that was not boredom but pure observation. "You aren't just an artist," she said softly. "No, you're like an anchor." Michael looked back at her, expression unreadable. Claire continued, "You don't try to change people, but somehow they begin to change when they are close to you." He gave a slow, somber smile, replying, "That is not always a good thing." "It is for me," she answered with a small laugh before confessing, "I am scared of this. I have never trusted anyone without a contract." Michael leaned back, a hand brushing against hers comfortingly. "Then don't trust me," he said. "Just sit beside me until it stops feeling so strange." She faced him, tears gathering unnoticed, feelings she could not explain. "And what if it never stops feeling strange?" "Then at least we will have company." The air was crisp, the city alive beneath them, and they remained there until the moon appeared above the tallest tower. No promises made, no grand gestures, just a peaceful silence shared between them. The start of something they both understood, neither had anticipated, but perhaps were at last prepared to embrace. The newly opened Whitman Wellness Wing welcomed visitors quietly on a Wednesday morning. There was no grand ribbon cutting, no media presence, just a few respectful handshakes, subtle nods, and a gradual flow of employees and patients exploring the bright hallways. Claire had insisted on a modest approach, letting people discover their own calm. She explained to her team, healing does not require a spotlight. The artwork was already in place. When she arrived, Michael had stayed late the night before, carefully arranging each painting without help or gallery tags, only soft lighting that created gentle auras around the pieces. The corridor carried the faint aroma of fresh paint and eucalyptus, and a peaceful hush filled the wing. Claire strolled through the reflection room, a lone coffee in her hand, her gaze lingering on each canvas. One portrayed a dozing fox curled up against a fallen log. Another depicted a dog watching an empty beach. But the last painting, the one Michael had made, after she left his home, took her breath away. The woman on the highway, eyes shut against the wind. Her blazer caught mid-motion, storm clouds breaking behind her. She gently touched the frame behind her. A quiet voice said, "They look different here." Claire turned to see Michael standing just inside the doorway, his usual calm enveloping him like a cherished coat. "They seem safer," he added. She smiled, perhaps because, at last, they were home. He approached her slowly, without any rush. The silence between them was no longer uncomfortable. It had transformed into something they both relied on. "People have been talking," she mentioned after a brief pause. Michael raised an eyebrow. "Are they speaking well, or is it the kind of talk that leads to board meetings?" "A bit of both," she confessed while sipping her coffee. "Some of my investors believe I am getting distracted." He did not answer right away, only looked at the painting before returning his gaze to her. "Are you Claire?" Have you thought about it? Maybe. But if this is a distraction, it is the kind that keeps me sane. He offered a slight smile. Then it is not a distraction. It is grounding. She nodded in agreement. That is exactly what I told them. Michael glanced around the space. This place feels different. I can sense it in the walls. You created something meaningful here. I did not do it alone, but you allowed it to become real. Claire felt the words settle deep within her. They walked along the corridor together in silence. When they stepped outside, the late afternoon sunlight was starting to stretch across the city. Claire paused near the parking area. Would you come with me to the fundraising dinner tomorrow evening? Michael blinked. As your date? As my guest, she clarified, then added maybe also as my shield. There will be questions, people trying to read into things that have not even been defined yet. He studied her expression. Do you want them to find out? Claire looked away, uncertain. I do not know what this is yet, but I understand it is important. I want them to recognize that something truly matters. After a brief pause, he nodded and said, I will be there. The dinner took place at the Grand Mayfield Hotel located downtown. It was one of those places featuring towering ceilings, ornate chandeliers resembling upside-down galaxies, and a carpet so expensive that its cost per square foot surpassed what most earned in a month. Claire arrived ahead of time, wearing a simple black evening dress which balanced elegance with subtlety. She greeted guests with firm handshakes, shared practiced smiles, posed reluctantly for 2 photos, and handled questions from donors who always spoke as if they were doing her a favor. Just as the string quartet began playing their second song, Michael appeared. He wore a well-fitted dark suit with plain lapels, an open-collared shirt, and no tie, just enough formality to meet expectations without losing his identity. When he entered, the room did not fall silent, yet Claire sensed a change in the atmosphere. She moved across the floor toward him and whispered, You clean up nicely. He grinned and replied, I already miss my boots. They sat together near the room's heart, surrounded by quiet murmurs they both ignored. A woman in a striking red dress leaned toward her husband and whispered something, while a board member from a partner company stared at Michael for too long. Despite this, Michael remained calm, did not fidget, did not shrink back, and showed no signs of pretending to fit in by denying who he was. When the toast began, Claire stood and raised her glass. I want to express my gratitude to everyone who helped make the wellness wing a reality, but most of all, I want to thank the individuals who reminded us of what true healing really means. Quiet endurance, unseen dedication, and those rare moments of calmness we often overlook. Tonight we pay tribute to her as she lifted her glass. Michael did not applaud. He simply gazed at her and she returned his look. After the speeches, after the forced chuckles and wearisome appetizers, they quietly slipped away. Not out of avoidance, but because the atmosphere no longer warranted their presence. They chose to stroll the Beltline path, behind the hotel, passing by silent runners and the occasional street musician playing softly on the bridge. The city buzzed, but in a gentler tone. Michael slid his hands into his coat pockets. You were not afraid in there. I was, she confessed. I just stopped letting it control me. He agreed. That is more challenging than most realize. They continued walking. Claire glanced sideways. Have you ever loved someone who doubted it? Without pause, he said, Yes, and I have also been loved by someone who aimed to change me first. It didn't last because love is meant to be a refuge, not a reformation. Claire sighed. You keep saying things like that and I might begin quoting you in business meetings. He laughed. Better to print it on a tote bag and sell it in the wellness section of the gift shop. She chuckled, but there was a new depth in her eyes. Then silence, Michael. What if we are just too different? She asked. He stopped walking and faced her. We are different, yet not in the ways that truly count. Her tone softened. You don't. No one cares about what others say about me or about us. He glanced up at the city skyline and then back at her. People gossip because they fear silence, yet you and we exist in that silence. That unsettles them. Claire stepped closer and let them remain uneasy. She did not kiss him, not yet, but stood near enough to sense the steady beat of his breathing, and he did not pull away. The breeze stirred softly, swirling leaves along the path behind them. "I'm not asking for forever," she murmured, "but I want to discover where this leads." Michael gave a single nod. "So do I." They continued walking, two shadows blending deeper into a city that suddenly felt less vast. Above them, the night sky stretched wide and peaceful, like a blank canvas waiting to be painted. The next Saturday, Claire was in her penthouse kitchen barefoot, her hair loosely tied in a bun, humming softly as she carefully ladled pancake batter onto the griddle. The window above the sink stood slightly open, allowing a gentle breeze from Peachtree Street below. She hadn't made breakfast like this for years, not out of obligation or to impress anyone or appear normal, but purely because she wanted to. The kitchen was filled with the scent of cinnamon and coffee, and every now and then the soft thud of paws against the floor in her living room could be heard. Michael lay sprawled on the rug just beyond the kitchen, brushing Rusty, his large golden retriever who had comfortably settled in her condo. Two smaller dogs rested nearby like faithful guardians who had found their place. They found their way back to her in the form of dogs. Claire poured orange juice into two mismatched glasses and called out, "You're getting dog hair all over the carpet." Michael did not look up. "They are shedding love," Claire laughed, a clear and sincere sound. One of the dogs barked in reply. She placed breakfast on the low coffee table and sat down cross-legged beside him. "I have experienced more silence in the past week than I have in 5 years. Not the lonely kind, but the good kind. The kind that allows me to hear my own thoughts. That is why I keep dogs," Michael said, sipping his coffee. They ate in peaceful comfort, occasionally brushing crumbs off their shirts and exchanging meaningful glances that spoke louder than words. It was not perfect, but that was the beauty of it. Claire no longer tried to carefully craft anything. She was not pretending to be someone who made investors feel secure. She was no longer hiding behind strategy presentations or confident nods. Later that morning, Claire opened her laptop to check her schedule. Her eyes landed on a notification for the annual Whitman Leadership Summit, an event she had hosted for many years. Usually it was packed with press interviews, keynote speeches, panel discussions, and hand-picked guest appearances. Yet something caused her to hesitate this time. She turned to Michael and said, "You remember that painting of the fox you showed me? The one curled up inside the burned-out tree?" He nodded slowly. "That one is older. I painted it shortly after my father passed away." Claire sat quietly with that thought for a moment. At that moment, Michael leaned back and said he was not sure if he would reveal it publicly. Maybe it depended on the reason. Claire wanted to showcase it at the Summit exhibition because she wished for people to experience a feeling that no press release could capture. He observed her closely and remarked that such openness was a bold risk for a CEO. She tilted her head and remarked that vulnerability suited someone with paint under his fingernails and surrounded by a pack of rescue dogs. Michael smiled and acknowledged her point as fair. Claire rose and moved toward the window, the city alive beneath her, but her eyes fixed somewhere far away on the horizon. She confessed she had once believed success meant being untouchable, that exposing one's tender side would give others the chance to hurt her. However, she was beginning to understand that most people were not looking to harm, but simply awaiting permission to let themselves feel deeply. Michael came to stand beside her and asked if she was granting them that permission. She turned to him and replied that she was just courageous enough to go first. 3 days later, the summit commenced inside the main atrium at the Whitman campus. As visitors passed through security, they walked by a temporary gallery Claire had insisted on personally curating. 7 of Michael's artworks adorned the walls, stripped of labels or price tags, bearing only titles such as The Wait, Rust, Memory Beneath the Pines, Breath Home, Unseen Departure, and Still. Visitors stopped, some lingering thoughtfully, others quickly averting their gaze. Yet Claire noticed something remarkable. No one could pass by without showing some kind of response. One woman, a retired nurse, who now volunteered helping patients through the foundation, stood quietly before the piece named Unseen Departure. For nearly 10 minutes, Claire Whitman quietly watched from a short distance, then gently wiped her eyes on the sleeve edge. Her assistant leaned closer and whispered, "Are we certain this is the appropriate tone for a leadership summit?" Claire turned and replied, This is precisely the tone. That evening, during her opening speech, she stood at the podium wearing a simple navy dress with no accessories except a silver ring her mother had passed down to her. Her notes lay untouched before her. "I have spent years trying to fit in here," she said in a calm and clear voice, "and just as many years concealing the parts of myself I feared would make others uneasy. But lately, I have begun to wonder, what if those uncomfortable parts are the most essential?" She looked toward the gallery wall and added, "What if pain does not signify defeat, but rather shows that we are still truly alive?" The room remained silent. She did not speak for long because she did not need to. Afterwards, Michael waited for her at the back of the auditorium. He wore no suit and made no effort to blend in, which was unnecessary. When their gazes locked, Claire did not smile. Instead, she exhaled deeply, as if releasing years of silent tension beneath applause that never really touched her. "Come with me," she said. They moved outside, away from the catered snacks and soft sounds of glasses clinking, past the rear terrace and into a rarely visited garden. Beneath a canopy of lights, a shallow reflecting pool shimmered as Claire paused in this quiet refuge. She crouched down and dipped her fingers into the water. "I used to come here before every important presentation," she whispered. "I would stare at my reflection until I believed the version of myself I needed to present." Michael said nothing and simply sat beside her. She went on, "But I always knew that if the water rippled even once, that version would vanish." Michael reached out, letting his hand gently touch hers at the edge of the pool. "You do not have to be still to be genuine," he said softly. "You're allowed to move and change. That does not make you any less authentic." Claire looked at him, the man who had repaired her radiator without asking, who had offered her a towel instead of compliments, who had shown her inner strength before she recognized it herself. "Why me?" she quietly asked. "Among everyone who could have helped that night, why me?" His eyes met hers, calm and filled with meaning. "Because you never asked for help, but you needed someone to remind you that it is okay to accept it." She blinked and tears began to fall, not loud or dramatic, but slow and steady, like something long frozen was finally starting to melt. Michael leaned closer, and this time she did not pull away. Their kiss was not like in the movies, no music, no applause, just soft and certain, like returning home. When they parted, Michael rested his forehead against hers. "Have you ever wondered what would have happened if your car had not broken down?" Claire smiled and whispered, "Then I would have kept driving right past what truly mattered." I had no idea I needed that evening. They made no guarantees, but Claire Whitman clasped Michael's hand as they moved back inside the building, passing murmuring guests and skeptical looks, never releasing her grip. For the first time in many years, Claire Whitman was not acting for an audience. She was fully engaged and present. 3 days after the summit, Claire sat in her office high above downtown Atlanta, gazing through the window. Rain began to fall softly, streaking the glass and transforming the skyline into a blurred canvas of gray and light. She had not touched her keyboard for nearly an hour. Her schedule, once packed with back-to-back appointments, was purposefully cleared. The summit had been a success, nothing more than that, but it had sparked discussions that had never taken place before in her company. Still, something pulsed beneath the calm surface, a subtle pull she could not shake. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Turning, she saw Diana, her executive assistant of almost 10 years, standing hesitantly. "There is someone downstairs asking for you," she said. "He would not provide his name, but mentioned he used to know your father." Claire's stomach tightened. "What exactly does he want?" Diana shook her head, remaining silent. "Just something odd about him. A military-style haircut, plain clothes, and eyes that hardly ever blinked." Claire closed her laptop and rose. She would meet him in the lobby. There, a tall black man in his 60s stood with his hands clasped behind his back. He wore a simple charcoal jacket, worn boots, and carried an unmistakable presence. The presence of someone accustomed to commanding attention without needing to ask was clear when Claire approached. He gave her a single nod and said, "Miss Whitman." She replied, "Yes, do we know each other?" Instead of reaching for a weapon, he pulled a photograph from his jacket and extended it toward Claire. She took it, frowning. The picture was old, its edges faded. It showed her father standing next to a younger version of the man before her. Behind them was a small airstrip with military-grade equipment. "I served alongside your father in Kandahar." My name is Thomas Burke, he explained. Claire blinked, surprised because her father had never mentioned him. Burke's voice was steady. Your father accomplished a lot, but did not talk about certain things. Claire stared at the photo, focusing on her father's smile, one she did not recognize, different from the usual corporate smile, something more genuine and relaxed. Burke carried on. He made enemies, Miss Whitman. Real enemies, not just people from boardrooms. These were the kind who don't rely on lawsuits, but instead use silence. Claire's breath caught. What could this possibly have to do with me? Burke paused, then softly said, Someone is prying into matters they have no right to. Names, assets, including yours. Claire took a step back, confused. That does not add up, he replied. Your name appeared on a list, alongside several others. It was traced to an untraceable server in South Carolina. They were not after your wealth, but seeking leverage. Claire's fingers tightened on the photo. Why are you telling me this? Burke softened. Because your father once saved me. He stepped into a dangerous situation without necessity, driven by the last words he uttered before dying. Take care of my girl if I ever can. Claire took a deep breath to calm herself. Do you know who is behind this? She asked. I have a theory, he replied. But theories are not proof, which is why I am here. She nodded quietly. You're not the first person trying to protect me this month. Michael looked at her with a mixture of admiration and caution. Then let's hope he is still alive when everything comes to light. Later that evening, Claire and Michael sat opposite each other on the worn couch in his studio. The room was illuminated softly by the glow of a table lamp and the occasional movement of a dog resting at their feet. She shared every detail about Michael Burke, the photograph, and the ominous warning. Observing him carefully, she noticed how his jaw clenched and his hand paused above the teacup she had given him. Were you aware of any of this? She inquired. Michael shook his head slowly. No, but I am not shocked, she frowned. What do you mean by that? He paused before replying. People in positions of power often gather enemies, particularly those who appear friendly in public yet prepare harm in secrecy. She looked down, troubled. Do you believe I have inherited that as well? I think you have taken on burdens you never asked for, he answered softly. But I also believe you are not your father. Claire glanced toward the painting hanging behind him. She had not noticed it before. It was an abstract piece dominated by shades of charcoal and steel blue. But, in the corner, the faint shape of a hand appeared through what seemed to be a veil of static. I do not want to become a target, she murmured softly. Michael gave a nod. Nobody wishes that, but fleeing from it is not an option either. She glanced at him, her voice barely audible. What if they come after you as well? Michael's gaze remained unwavering. Let them try, he said calmly. Over the following days, Claire Whitman's existence adopted a different rhythm. Outwardly, nothing seemed altered. Board meetings, media questions, and planned public engagements went on as usual. Yet, beneath the surface, something else began to take shape. Michael started instructing her on how to spot cars that might be following her. Burke sent coded updates through a secure application. Without being asked, Diana began screening Claire's calls much more thoroughly. One afternoon, Claire returned from a meeting and discovered a small, handwritten note tucked under her door. No envelope, just 4 words. You think you're safe. She stared at the message, her heart pounding fiercely. It was not the threat by itself that unsettled her, but the chilling certainty in its bluntness. She folded the note carefully and locked it away in a drawer. Later that evening, she contacted Michael. He came to pick her up in a borrowed truck. The dogs were already settled in the back. Where are we headed? She inquired. Someplace without any cell service, he replied. They drove for about 1 hour, climbing into the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains until they reached a cabin surrounded by thick pine trees. It belonged to an old friend of Michael's, a writer who seldom used it anymore. Inside, the air carried the scent of cedar and dust. Michael started a fire while Claire opened the aged refrigerator and was surprised to find it stocked with bottled water, a few cans of soup, and about half a dozen packs of crackers. She chuckled despite herself and said, Is this your version of off-grid safety? Michael simply shrugged and replied, You are safe here. There is no Wi-Fi, no online address posted, and the closest neighbor is a retired Navy sharpshooter with a surveillance drone. She raised an eyebrow, thinking, of course he is. Later, wrapped in a flannel blanket on the sofa, Claire leaned against Michael's shoulder. The fire crackled quietly as one of the dogs rested its chin on her foot. She whispered, you know, I once believed I was creating something lasting, something untouchable. He stayed silent as she continued. Now I realize I was merely building walls, not homes or bonds, just barriers to prevent the world from seeing the true me. Michael's hand found hers, and she said softly, now, I want something different. I want something that can withstand the flames, not just look good in a magazine. He turned to her, brushing a loose lock of hair from her face, and said, you have already begun. That meeting was your first stone. Claire looked deeply into his eyes and whispered, then help me build the rest. They did not kiss, nor did they need to. The quiet between them held more meaning than words ever could. Outside, the night grew colder, but inside the cabin, the warmth remained. For the first time in weeks, Claire slept without double-checking the locks, because she knew that no matter the storm or lurking shadows, she was finally safe. Amidst the glass towers, she no longer faced the challenge alone, and somewhere in the quiet beneath the pine-covered roof of a temporary refuge, the struggle for her father's heritage started to change form. It was no longer something handed down, but something to be won back. The following morning, Claire awoke to the steady sound of Michael chopping firewood outside the cabin. She sat up slowly, the warm aroma of cedar still lingering on the blanket draped over her shoulders. The fire had dimmed, casting gentle orange sparks across the wooden floor. One of the dogs lifted its head from beside the couch and let out a sleepy grunt before settling back down. For the first time in what seemed like months, her body was not tense. There was no early morning alarm, no inbox ready to ambush her with issues she hadn't caused, just silence and Michael's presence. She stepped outside, her breath visible in the crisp mountain air. Michael didn't notice her immediately. He was focused, his movements smooth, as he split a log perfectly in two. She watched him a moment longer than intended. There was something in the way he moved, steady, purposeful, genuine, that felt like a language she was only now beginning to comprehend. Eventually he saw her and smiled. Did you sleep okay? I did, she replied. Better than I have in years. Good, he said. Firewood is for later. This place can get cold real fast once the sun goes down. She nodded before hesitating. Do you really think they will try something while we are here? Michael answered simply, I don't know, but people, if they cannot locate you, they try to force you out. She folded her arms and said maybe it was time to stop hiding. He met her gaze evenly and replied, then we do it your way, Diana. Back in the city, Diana was in her office going through Claire Whitman's mail when she found a manila envelope without a return address. Carefully, she opened it and took out a USB stick along with a single sheet of paper that read, Play the file, Diana. She paused briefly before inserting the USB into her laptop. A video automatically started playing. Initially blurry, the image gradually became clearer. It showed security footage of Claire's father inside a parking garage. He was speaking to a man dressed in an expensive suit, seemingly in his late 50s, clean-shaven, with his face partly turned away from the camera. The conversation appeared strained. At one point, the man shoved Claire's father against the wall, whispered something in his ear, and then walked away. A timestamp in the corner said 4 days before death. Diana's hand lingered over the mouse. She quickly copied the file and called Claire saying, I need to show you something right now. Claire arrived at the downtown office later that night. The rain was pouring heavily, hammering against the lobby windows. Diana led her into the conference room, locked the door behind them, and lowered the lights. She hit play. Claire held her breath for the first 30 seconds. Then she asked who the man was. Diana replied, I ran facial recognition, and opened another tab showing the results. His name is Marcus Velman, CEO of Velman Equity Holdings. Claire's expression changed as she absorbed the information. She felt her face turn pale. They attempted to buy my father's company in 2009, but he turned them down. She added that their financiers had questionable backgrounds. Diana nodded in agreement. It seems they did not accept refusal gracefully. The two women remained quiet for a long moment. Then Claire said, We are going public. Are you certain? Diana inquired. This will make you a much bigger target than before. Claire's voice was steady. That danger already exists. I just refuse to act as if it does not. Later that evening, back at Michael's studio, Claire stood before a blank canvas he had offered her gently and with respect, after noticing how frequently her fingers twitched while she stared at his artwork. She had not held a brush in years, not since college, since the world convinced her that creativity was a weakness in business. Now, the brush felt heavier than she remembered, but not in a negative sense. Michael stood silently a few steps behind, giving her space. She dipped the bristles into a soft charcoal gray and made the first stroke on the white surface, then another and another. Shapes emerged, not exact, but full of feeling. A city skyline, two hands reaching from separate rooftops, a streak of blue between them resembling either a bridge or lightning. She did not yet understand what it symbolized, but sensed it was something genuine. Michael stepped closer. That looks good, he said quietly. Claire faced him. Do you always say that, or only when you mean it? He smiled. I am not foolish about art or people. She looked back at the painting. I believe I forgot who I was. I was caught between quarterly reports and calls with investors. When he reminded me, you did not forget. He said you just got overwhelmed. The very next morning, Claire Whitman returned to her office building for the first time since the summit. Cameras flashed the moment she stepped out of the car. Her security team, now tripled in size, flanked her on each side. She wore a simple black coat, plain heels, and only enough makeup to conceal the dark circles beneath her eyes. She made her way directly to the media podium. Behind her, a large screen showed a still from the video of her father's bruised and cornered face 2 nights earlier. She began speaking. A file was anonymously sent to my office. What I discovered confirmed my worst fears, not only about the circumstances of my father's death, but also about the deep-rooted network of power that has long operated unchecked in this city. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. I will not be intimidated, she declared, and I will not rest until those responsible face justice, regardless of their wealth, title, or the position they hold. Michael watched the live broadcast from the studio. Around him, a dozen dogs sat quietly as if sensing the gravity of the moment. When Claire finished and left the camera, he turned to his easel, revealing a half-completed portrait. It was her, not the polished CEO image, nor the professional publicity photo, but the version he had seen late at night, barefoot in the kitchen, clutching a cup of tea with both hands, listening more than speaking. He dipped the brush into a streak of amber and murmured to himself, "She is no longer buried." Later that night, Claire's phone rang. It was Thomas Burke on the other end. They are aware you are relocating. They will escalate the situation, he warned. Claire replied firmly, No, you are not ready. Burke insisted firmly, but you will be. I have arranged something. Meet me at 8 o'clock in the morning tomorrow. Do not bring anyone, especially not him. Curious, Claire asked, Why not? He answered, If they are monitoring you, he is already a risk. We cannot allow them to use him to reach you. Claire tightened her jaw and said, Then you better teach me to fight like he does. Burke laughed, a deep, gravelly sound, and said, You already possess something more powerful than his fists. What is that? Your conscience and a voice that others trust. Claire gave no answer, ended the call, and stood silently. Her reflection stared back at her from the window glass. Not the woman she used to be. Not yet the woman she would become, but somewhere in between. For now, that was enough. The sun had barely risen when Claire entered the warehouse, located on the edge of the riverfront district. The atmosphere inside smelled of dust and cold metal. Above, old fluorescent lights flickered as if struggling to stay on. Thomas Burke was already present, standing by a long table cluttered with files, a laptop, and an object hidden beneath a dark cloth. She closed the heavy door behind her and said, You said do not bring anyone. He glanced up and responded, And you listened. That is progress. Claire took a step forward, her heels resounding through the vast emptiness. I did not come here for jokes. No, Michael responded, removing the cloth to reveal a sleek black case. You came because you are about to enter a battle, and fighting does not wait. It does not pause for speeches. He opened the case, revealing a simple black handgun. and a folded sheet of paper covered with bullet points, containing names, addresses, and connections. Claire gazed at the weapon. I am not going to resolve this through violence. Michael met her stare. And then you must be ready if violence finds you. She let out a slow breath. So what is the plan? We leaked the video, Michael said, but not just online. We send it to every investor, every board member, every journalist who still values the truth. He added, they will try to silence me. They already have. Michael continued, what you do next will determine if they succeed. He pushed a tablet toward her. On the screen appeared a photo of Marcus Vellman, taken 2 nights ago at a private dinner with city officials. Claire narrowed her eyes. He does not even blink. Men like him do not need to, Michael replied, until someone forces them to. Meanwhile, in Michael's studio, the house was unusually still. The dogs lay asleep, curled in their usual spots. Michael sat on the back porch, sketchbook in hand, but his pencil was still. His eyes were distant, fixed on the horizon as dark clouds rolled in from the east. His phone buzzed with a message from Claire. I am safe, but we are moving forward no matter the cost. He quickly typed back, I am with you. Always then he stood up, walked inside, and began collecting materials like charcoal and paint. Among several completed artworks, he opened a cabinet in the hallway and took out a canvas wrapped in plastic. It was the one he had kept hidden, never shown to anyone. The piece he had painted many years ago, before the studio, before the dogs, when the world seemed colder. The painting depicted a man overwhelmed by silence, not defeated or shattered, but erased. He looked at it now, tracing the edges with his fingers, whispering, time to bring this out. Later that night, Claire Whitman arrived at the city courthouse, accompanied by Diana and 2 security officers. Protesters filled the sidewalk, some holding signs demanding justice, others carrying banners, criticizing her campaign as nothing more than a public relations stunt. Police officers stood between the crowds and the grand marble steps. Inside the chamber, a hearing was already in progress, an emergency ethics review prompted by the leaked footage. Cameras recorded every moment, and microphones awaited her words. Claire stepped up to the podium with a steady voice. 3 weeks ago, I thought the worst thing that could happen to me was failure. Now I understand the worst is silence. My father tried to protect something, this company, this city, these values, and they killed him for it. A murmur spread through the room as the council chair attempted to speak, but Claire continued, we cannot fix this by pretending it did not happen. We cannot buy our way out, and I refuse to let his death be forgotten as just a minor detail. Someone's financial statement. She hesitated, surveying the room. I am aware that some of you are involved, yet I also recognize that not everyone is. A sudden silence filled the space. Then from the back row, an older woman wearing a blue hat rose quietly. My son worked alongside your father, she said gently. He told me your father protected the pensions of 200 employees by rejecting that buyout. He said your father was the only person in that room who stood firm. Claire blinked to hold back unexpected tears. I remember him, the woman continued softly. He used to say, if you lose your name, you lose everything. The room grew still. Claire stepped away from the podium. No vote was necessary because the truth had already taken hold. That evening, Michael found her near the shore of Lake Merritt, where a neighborhood art market was preparing early stalls. He had arranged a small booth under a tent hung with soft lights and unframed paintings. Claire moved closer, her gaze wandering across the artworks. Did you create all these? She asked. He nodded. Most of them. Some date back to before I had a studio, before the dogs. Her hand paused over one painting, a striking portrait of a young black boy, sitting on cracked pavement, with his shadow transforming into wings behind him. It was bold and unapologetic. I think I've seen this before, she whispered. Michael raised an eyebrow. Where? In a downtown gallery several years ago. The artist wasn't named. He gave a faint smile. That was me. I went by a different name. Claire looked at him. Why keep it a secret? I didn't believe my voice mattered. She shook her head. It does. It did. He met her gaze. His eyes held a feeling he had not voiced, and your Claire took a step nearer. I am still figuring out how to use it. They stood quietly for a moment until Michael reached for her hand. She did not pull away. I want to reveal to the world what I see in you, he said. And I wish to view myself as you do, she answered. By the end of the week, major news outlets had caught the story. Headlines read, CEO confronts corruption following father's unexplained death. Whistleblower video triggers probe into Velman equity. And anonymous artist behind viral portrait identified as Claire's ally. Some board members quietly resigned while others went on leave. Velman called for a press conference, but on the morning of the event, as he prepared to address the crowd, protesters chanted Claire's name outside. They held up copies of the video, reproductions of Michael's artwork, and signs stating, "Justice cannot be bought," and "We remember the silenced." Velman's face drained of color as he watched the footage playing repeatedly on the screen behind the podium. He did not finish his speech. In fact, he did not say a word. Back in Michael's studio, Claire stood once more before his easel. This time, she was the one gripping the brush. Her blazer rested on a nearby chair and her sleeves were rolled up. "Do you think this one is ready?" she asked. Michael folded his arms as he examined the piece. "It's daring, sincere, and truly yours," she smiled. "It's freeing not to conceal anymore." He moved behind her and gently placed his hand on her shoulder. "You were never hiding, just waiting for the perfect moment. Reason." Outside, the dogs barked eagerly, and someone knocked at the door. Claire opened it to see a young intern from her company holding a package. "There has been an anonymous donation," the girl explained, "for the community center your father helped establish." Claire unfolded the envelope inside the box. No signature, just a note. Some debts should be paid quietly, but some voices deserve to resonate. She glanced at Michael and said, "I think this is only the beginning," feeling for the first time in a long while a spark of belief. Claire stood alone in the heart of her late father's office, where sunlight streamed through the slatted blinds, casting elongated shadows across the wooden floor. Everything remained exactly as he left it. His favorite leather chair, slightly tilted toward the window, the antique clock ticking faintly on the shelf, and the lingering aroma of cedar and aged books filling the air. Yet, for the first time, she no longer felt haunted by absence. Instead, she sensed his presence in every detail. Her phone vibrated with a message from Diana. "Board vote tomorrow. They are nervous." Claire replied calmly, "Good. Let them fret." She slipped the phone into her coat pocket and crossed the room. On the desk lay a sealed envelope, addressed in her father's handwriting. "For Claire, when the time is right." She paused, her fingers trembling slightly, before breaking the seal. Inside was a single sheet of stationery, bearing a brief message. If you are reading this, you have already done what I never had the courage to do. I was not brave enough to speak the truth. Be braver than I was. Do not just repair the company. Transform the very meaning of leadership." Claire folded the note and pressed it against her heart. "I will, Dad," she murmured. "I promise." That evening, Michael arrived at the Community Arts Center where a ceremony to unveil a mural was underway. Children dashed about the small courtyard, their hands coated in chalk dust. Meanwhile, volunteers handed out warm chocolate and donuts. At the far side of the courtyard stood the newly finished mural, a towering homage to workers' visionaries and those left forgotten. At its core was the silhouette of a man lifting a shattered column surrounded by people of diverse backgrounds and ages, united in lifting the burden together. Claire came a few moments later dressed in a plain gray coat and scarf. The crowd parted for her, offering quiet words of gratitude, gentle pats on the shoulder, and occasional firm handshakes. She glanced over to Michael, standing by the mural, with paint still staining his knuckles. "You completed it," she said softly, filled with awe. "We did," he answered. "You gave them a symbol to hold on to." She stepped closer to examine a small hidden detail, nestled in the mural's corner. A golden dog gently touching a boy's shoe with its paw. She smiled. "That one's for Waffles," Michael explained. He had insisted on including it. Suddenly, the mayor appeared without warning, flanked by two aides. Cameras flashed rapidly, capturing the moment. Claire turned around and straightened her posture, prepared for another political negotiation, but instead the mayor offered his hand. "I have reviewed the recordings. What you revealed took courage," he said. "If you are still willing, we want your assistance in revising our ethics guidelines." Claire paused, surprised. You want me to help change the rules? Not just rebuild them, the mayor clarified. Later that evening at Michael's studio, Claire sat at the dining table sorting through a pile of community letters, some handwritten, others typed, coming from former staff, local entrepreneurs, and even retirees. One letter expressed, I thought people like you no longer existed. I am glad to be mistaken. Another read, my son watched your speech and said he wants to be like you rather than a YouTuber. That means everything. Michael entered holding 2 mugs of coffee and placed one in front of her. You have become more than just a CEO, he said softly. People recognize you now. She took a sip, her eyes shining. It is frightening, yet it feels right, as though I have finally stepped into the open. Michael reached into a drawer and brought out a small wrapped gift. I made this for you. She carefully removed the wrapping to reveal a hand-painted wooden box, intricately carved with symbolic images. An open eye, a bridge, and a broken chain. On the lid, in golden ink, were the words, For when you forget who you are. She brushed her fingers along the edges. It is stunning. It is yours, Michael said warmly. At moments when uncertainty creeps in the following morning, Claire Whitman entered the conference room. It was the very same room where she had once felt like a fraud surrounded by polished egos and forced smiles. But now she walked in with a quiet assurance. Michael trailed calmly beside her, a silent source of support. The board members had already taken their seats. Some appeared rigid, others hesitant, and a few wore expressions as cold as stone. Marcus Velman was notably absent, and his chair at the head of the table remained conspicuously empty. The chairwoman addressed the room. Miss Leland, we have received your motion. This meeting will decide on the removal of Mr. Velman as CEO and consider your proposal for a new leadership structure. Claire nodded. Before the vote, she requested to speak. Approaching the front and meeting every gaze, she declared that the company was founded on trust. Not just financial trust, but a conviction that they stood for something beyond secret deals and hidden truths. That trust had been broken when silence took precedence over justice and when power was guarded over people. That ends now. She paused and said, If you vote to maintain comfort, vote no. If you vote for truth, no matter the cost, vote yes. Silence fell over the room as hands slowly rose one after another in favor. Yes, yes, yes. When the vote was counted, the chairwoman looked at Claire and announced the motion had passed. Marcus Velman was immediately removed from his position, and an interim leadership would be named during the upcoming internal changes. Claire exhaled slowly as a surge of emotion threatened to overwhelm her. An overwhelming sensation swelled within her chest, yet she restrained it for the moment since there was still work to be done. That evening, Claire and Michael returned to the modest hill behind his studio, the one that overlooked the city lights in the distance. They sat side by side on a worn quilt, sipping tea and gazing at the skyline. It still feels unreal, Claire confessed. You did not just win, Michael replied. You rewrote the rules. Turning toward him, she said, I never imagined someone like you would be by my side when it happened. He smiled. I merely reminded you of what you always possessed. Claire gently rested her head on his shoulder. It is not finished, she whispered. The consequences remain lawsuits, media backlash. There will always be new fights, he assured her, but now you're not facing them alone. A breeze stirred the leaves around them. Somewhere below, dogs barked once before falling silent. Claire lifted her head and met Michael's eyes. I want to create something different, she said. Not only the company, but a new way of living and leading. And I want you to join me. Instead of replying with words, he leaned in and kissed her softly, carrying the weight of everything they had endured. This was not a kiss of victory, but a kiss of honesty, and it felt enough. Back at the studio, a light flickered on. Waffles padded across the floor, sniffed at the front door, and barked once. Michael opened the door to find a boy no older than 10 standing there, clutching a worn sketchbook. Are you the man who painted the wings? He inquired of Michael. Kneeling down, Michael replied, I am. The boy diverted his gaze to the floor, then carefully extended his sketchbook. Would you teach me? Michael glanced over at Claire Whitman, who was observing from the hallway. She gave a silent nod. Yes, kid, Michael whispered. I think we can start right now. The morning following the vote, Claire stepped out of Michael's studio and into the crisp dawn air. The world seemed transformed, not due to any external shift, but because of a change within her. She made her way to the corner convenience store near the edge of the arts district, picked up 2 coffees, and paused outside as steam rose into the cool morning. A woman passed with a weary nod, and a city sanitation worker who recognized her from the news nodded his head in quiet respect. Claire did not wave back. Instead, she simply smiled gently, keeping the moment close to her heart like a private blessing. Back at the studio, Michael was already awake, feeding the dogs while softly humming a blues melody under his breath. "You slipped out," he remarked as he noticed her arrival. "Just for some coffee and a bit of peace. Find either one?" He handed her a napkin to dry the moisture clinging to her scarf. She glanced around the room, still filled with clutter and commotion, vibrant with color and energy. It was the exact opposite of any formal boardroom she had ever known, yet it felt far more enduring. Later that day, a reporter from the Herald Tribune called, requesting an exclusive interview. The vote had already gone viral, everyone eager to understand how the iron-willed CEO had outmaneuvered the Golden Boy. Marcus Velman did not respond, and Claire stated firmly, this was not about revenge, but rather about making amends. Despite this, the media did not give up. Headlines appeared everywhere, bearing titles such as CEO Breaks Silence and Justice in the Boardroom. One even called it The Woman Who Took Down Velman. Another read Beauty and the Brave, referring to the artist and the executive. Claire despised that last one because they sought a fairy tale, but this was not a love story, in truth. It was a moment of reckoning. The mayor's office followed through on its prior offer, appointing Claire to an ethics committee tasked with supervising municipal-private partnerships. Although the role involved mostly tedious paperwork and lengthy meetings, it granted her influence and, more significantly, access to decision-makers. She began to advocate for structural changes that would establish real oversight, both within the city and the corporate world. Michael supported her continuously, even when she arrived home late, worn out and frayed at the edges. "You cannot fix everything," he said once, gently rubbing her back as she sank onto the couch. Claire whispered in reply, "Perhaps I can just make it a bit harder for people to hide." Meanwhile, rumors surrounding Marcus began to emerge. Though nothing concrete appeared, no charges filed, no official statements made. Still, the atmosphere had shifted. Anonymous insiders claimed he had fled to a villa in Switzerland, and another source suggested that the Department of Justice had quietly launched an investigation. Claire did not care about his whereabouts. He was gone, and that alone was enough. One evening, she and Michael went to a gallery opening where one of his pies signed with his pseudonym was displayed among the highlighted pieces. It was the portrait he had created of her, although no one else would identify it as such. The brushstrokes were both gentle and vigorous, the face hidden in shadows, yet the posture was impossible to mistake, defiant and still upright. She was waiting. A woman nearby whispered to her companion, unaware that Claire Whitman stood close enough to overhear, saying she was waiting for justice or perhaps hope. Claire turned away, her throat tightening. Michael offered his arm and said, "You gave people a face to fight for," softly, "and now they are discovering their own." However, not everyone admired her. Criticism simmered quietly. Some accused her of planning a takeover, while others suggested her involvement with Michael was a mere distraction or a public relations tactic. An anonymous journalist wrote, "Powerful women who fall for street artists are either naive or building a brand. Either way, it will not last." Claire did not respond openly, but Michael noticed how tightly she gripped her coffee cup that morning. "Are you all right?" he asked. She nodded, then with a dry chuckle said, "Apparently I am both a cunning genius and a credulous lover. That's balance." He teased, but she did not smile. What if they are right? She wondered aloud. What if everything I did was only to prove something? Michael stayed silent for a moment, then replied, "We are all trying to prove something, Claire. But the difference is, you gave something back when you did." About a week later, Claire returned to her father's house, the one she had overlooked it for such a long time that it still felt chilly, even though the spring sunlight was flooding through the windows. She wandered from room to room, brushing her fingers against familiar items. His medals, his books, the family pictures that had not been changed since her college days. In the back closet, she discovered something she had not laid eyes on since her teenage years. A photograph of her father as a young man shaking hands with a black union leader after finalizing a worker protection deal. The image surprised her because she had remembered him as a strict, emotionally distant corporate figure. Yet, here he was, smiling with his sleeves rolled up, standing up for something. Perhaps she had not known everything about him, and maybe she never would, but possibly she had inherited more than she had imagined. That evening, Claire Whitman sat at the small desk in the corner of Michael's studio and started drafting a proposal, not aimed at the board or the city, but for a foundation that would redirect executive bonuses to support grassroots arts initiatives and community leadership programs, especially in areas that were often neglected financially. "We'll name it the Bridge Fund," she said to herself, and Michael, painting close by, glanced over and remarked, "Because bridges bear weight and unite what has been divided." "Exactly," she replied. By the end of the week, she had already secured the initial contribution from a former board member who had opposed her before, but now admitted her speech had changed his perspective. More donors followed, cautiously at first, then in growing numbers. She was building something new, not for profit, but for lasting impact. The following Sunday, Claire took Michael to meet her mother. At first, the atmosphere was tense. Her mother, always formal and cautiously reserved, sat facing Michael with a polite yet inscrutable look. Then Michael praised her rose garden, and within 10 minutes, they were chatting about types of fertilizers and the acidity of soil, as if they had known each other for years. Later on in the kitchen, her mother pulled Claire aside and said, "He is kind, and that is what counts. Don't let the world make you forget what truly matters." Claire blinked in surprise. "You approve?" she asked. Her mother replied, "I like how you see him. You haven't been this open in years." During the drive home, Claire rested her head against the window, whispering, "I used to believe that power was the only way to stay safe, but it seems trust is even stronger." Michael reached for her hand and softly said, "Then let's create something built on trust." They passed a mural of Michael's work that had been vandalized. Spray paint covered the faces. Claire winced, and Michael responded quietly, "We will repaint it. They cannot erase color forever." She whispered back, "No, but they will keep trying." That night they sat in the studio with waffles asleep at their feet. Claire opened her laptop and read the latest message from a girl in Detroit. "I watched the video of your board speech. My school is run by the same sort of people. I'm not meant to be a CEO, but I will try. Thank you for proving it is not foolish to care." Claire did not shed tears this time, but held those words inside her like a guiding light. During the storm, the real ordeal was just beginning, breaking the silence she once had. The summer air hung heavy with the scent of ash. It began with a phone call, one of those late-night rings that make your stomach drop before you even answer. Claire had been asleep on the couch next to Michael, a documentary playing quietly on the muted television. The call came from a local officer, not a friend nor a stranger, just a man with a badge and a duty. "Ma'am, there has been a fire at the studio. It is gone." She did not scream or move, instead. She held the phone tightly until Michael stirred beside her, his eyebrows knitting together. "What is wrong?" he asked in a soft voice, still heavy with sleep. Her mouth opened, but the words weighed her down like lead. Finally, she breathed, "Your home, it is destroyed." When they reached the site, the building was nearly a charred skeleton against the lightening dawn. Smoke still curled from the blackened remains. The fire chief stood nearby, holding his helmet under one arm, his expression grave. "No injuries," he said calmly, "but this was deliberate. We found accelerants. Someone wanted it to burn quickly." Michael stepped forward wordlessly, the ground beneath him crackling with shattered glass, charred brushes, and broken canvas frames. Claire followed quietly, unsure whether to speak, touch him, or disappear. He stopped before what had once been his easel. Only the mangled metal frame and a streak of color remained in the ashes. The floor, a mix of deep blue and ochre, had fused in the fire like a stubborn memory. Claire Whitman reached out to touch his hand. It was cold and rigid. Yet he did not pull away. "I should have known," he whispered, his voice empty. "They could not erase the boardroom, so they destroyed my walls. It was not about art, she explained, voice trembling. It was about you, about what you represent. He gave a slow nod. Same difference. The arson investigation would drag on for several weeks, filled with denials, dead ends, and silent political interference. Claire called in every favor she knew, as did the Bridge Fund's legal team, yet nothing stuck. No arrests, just vague apologies and hollow promises. We are doing everything we can, Miss Warner, they said. Behind closed doors, she seethed. In public, she remained composed. Michael, however, showed no anger or shouting. He simply kept working, borrowing a corner of Claire's apartment, turning her sunroom into a temporary studio. The dogs adapted quickly, and so did the chaos. But it felt different, more restrained, yet haunted. One night, after a long meeting, Claire walked in to find him seated in the center of the room, surrounded by empty canvases, eyes closed, hands resting on his knees. "Are you all right?" she asked. He did not answer immediately, then said softly, "They burned everything, but they couldn't take the hands." His quiet words echoed louder than any speech she had ever delivered. The next day, Michael began again, not with brushes, but with charcoal. Rough sketches, harsh lines, and bleeding angles. Onto the canvas. Like revealing secrets, Claire Whitman observed from the doorway, arms crossed, her heart suspended between pain and wonder. Then came the phone call from the Whitney. They had followed the news coverage, watched the boardroom footage, seen the blaze. They wished to host a solo exhibition. Michael chuckled initially. "I have never even stepped into the spotlight," he said. "They do not know me. There is no need." Claire responded, "They have witnessed the reality." And so began a sequence of late nights and dawn hours. New canvases emerged, marked by daring brushstrokes. Claire assisted him in documenting the pieces, crafting the artist's statement, naming each work carefully. Together, they reclaimed the narrative that nearly vanished. On the night of the opening, the gallery overflowed. Art critics, former board members, foundation supporters, and everyday locals filled the space. Many recognized Claire on sight. Others admired the art. Yet nobody anticipated the identity of the creator. When Michael appeared wearing a simple black suit without a tie, with shoes still flecked with charcoal, the room fell silent. It was not the hush of celebrity, but the heaviness of the presence he held. Quiet as a brewing storm, profound and justified. Claire stood next to him, her hand gently touching his. "Are you ready?" she asked. "No," he answered, "but we will proceed anyway." They moved among the vast portraits, radiating resistance and grief. One wall displayed a diptych, featuring on the left a faceless boardroom drowning in gold, and on the right a barefoot child holding a mirror up to it, fractured yet whole. Beneath, a plaque told the story. The sign read, "Accountability." Hanging prominently in the center of the room was the largest piece, a reimagined version of a painting he had once created of Claire, now with her face fully revealed, neither softened nor glamorized, but authentic. The wrinkles by her eyes, the subtle curve of her lips, the firmness in her posture. This piece was entitled "The Witness." A reporter stepped forward, recorder in hand, asking, "What message do you want people to take away tonight?" Claire glanced at Michael, allowing him to respond. He met the reporter's eyes and stated simply that silence does not mean defeat, and kindness does not equal weakness. The quote appeared in the New York Times the following morning, but more significantly, it spread across countless social media posts, community newsletters, and flyers pinned up in school corridors. It had outgrown being just an art exhibit. It had become a movement. Months rolled by, and the Bridge Fund grew, launching new branches in Philadelphia, Oakland, and Houston. Claire divided her time between these cities while continuing to advocate for laws to hold executives accountable. Michael painted, led weekend workshops for teenagers, and constructed a new studio made from recycled wood and donated stone. On their anniversary, marking 1 year since that broken-down car and cautious glance, Michael surprised her. They drove out of the city, past the freeway's boundary, down a twisting gravel path leading to a small cabin nestled among trees. Inside, above the fireplace, hung a fresh painting of Claire, her eyes closed, her forehead peaceful. Pressed gently against his chest, surrounded by their softly glowing dogs, resting at their feet, he whispered, "I created this for us, not out of necessity, but because we deserved it. Claire turned toward him, tears shimmering in her eyes. I do not know what to say. Then do not say anything, he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. Just stay. They remained in silence for a long time, enveloped in each other's warmth. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees like a familiar, ancient melody. Later, Claire stood on the porch watching the sunset dissolve into darkness. Her thoughts wandered to the fire, the boardroom, the young woman in Detroit, the whispering lady at the gallery, and the elderly judge who once declared that power was a unique kind of silence. Quietly, she spoke to herself with quiet assurance. We are not defined by what we destroy. We are shaped by what we rebuild. Behind her, Michael added, Then, let us continue to build. Because love did not arrive through grand exploits or headlines, it lived in the stillness, the ashes, the brushstroke after ruin, and in hands that reached out to one another despite everything.